Good evening, everyone. I'm Dave Rogers, State Representative for the 24th Middlesex District, Arlington, Belmont, and Cambridge. Welcome. Wow, what an event we have planned. And there's still a line snaking around the building. Fortunately, we have an overflow room for our other guests. We have just an incredible esteemed panel to talk to you this evening, and it's really an honor to be here for this Climate Crisis Action Summit. And we're also doing a lot of wonderful things here in state government. We're pushing to increase the renewable portfolio standard and really countless other initiatives. And it's really my honor now to introduce our wonderful State Senator Will Brownsberger. And Will has been involved in all these issues for many years, including working on the Global Warming Solutions Act and countless other initiatives. So please welcome Senator Brownsberger.
Thank you so much for that introduction and for your leadership, Dave. You've been a wonderful partner on this issue and on so many other issues in the legislature. It's very appropriate that we're having this event here in Belmont High School, which is very shortly to be a zero-energy building. Not this very building, but a building that will be built on this site to meet the town's needs, but also to align with our clean energy goals. In the midst of all of the domestic turmoil that we're experiencing now, it is easy to lose sight of the deepest issue that we have before us, which is, in fact, climate change. Okay. But Ed Markey, while fighting the battles that he needs to fight as a result of what's happening down there, has not lost, that's all I can say, has not lost sight of the big picture and is keeping his eyes on the prize and moving that issue forward. And that's what we expect of Ed, because Ed saw this issue decades ago, and he's been a leader on this issue since long before most people were paying attention, and he deserves huge credit for that. Yeah, yeah. So we're grateful for all of his past leadership and looking forward very much to his leadership in the future. And before turning to introduce the members of the panel and ultimately the senator himself, I want to acknowledge a few folks that are here. We've got the chairman of the Belmont Board of Selectmen, Adam Dash, who's been an important part of making Belmont green. We've got our governor's counselor, Marilyn Petito-Devaney. Welcome, Marilyn. We've got Frank Smizek, who's long been the chair of the Global Warming Committee in the House. Frank partnered in 2007, and I was just a pup legislature and kind of the person he was mentoring back then. But he and Mark Pacheco partnered together to pass the Global Warming Solutions Act in 2007. Which really set us in a good direction. Senator Pacheco is here with us tonight. And Senator Pacheco is still on the issue, also someone who's had a long record of leadership on the issue. And he's in this most recent legislative session, he and Senator Barrett, Michael Barrett, the Senate chair of the Telecommunications and Energy Commission, have partnered on a very significant piece of legislation which has come through the Senate, which will move us forward in practically every single knob you can turn to reduce our energy consumption. Mike, please stand up. So I'm going to tell you who our panelists are and thank them for they're just very significant people, and it's really an honor to have them here in Belmont, and I'm very much looking forward to their talk. Gina McCarthy. Gina is the former administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency and now the director of Sea Change, the Center for Climate Health and Global Environment at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. We've got Dr. John Holdren. For 8 years, he was President Obama's science advisor, and he is now the John Hines Professor of Environmental Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And doesn't get much, it's amazing the group we have for you here. Todd Stern, the chief U.S. negotiator of the Paris Climate Agreement and now senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Also now a distinguished fellow at the World Resources Institute. These three have been leaders for the past many years and promoted science, protected the public health, carried the mantle of global leadership in climate change around the world. So I'm just unbelievably honored to have the privilege of introducing them, and I'm especially honored to have the privilege of introducing our U.S. Senator and the wonderful leader on this issue, Ed Markey. I hope. You're going to have to move to get in that screen, Ed.
He's lost considerable weight since.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to ask the panelists to begin talking first. So, Gina, why don't you go ahead with your introductory talks? And, there he is. There he is. You ready, Ed, for me to turn it over to you?
Gentlemen, can you hear me in Belmont?
You're on. You're on.
Well, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. We have just an incredible cast of people. I thank Dave Rogers and Will Brownsberger for their great leadership, to Michael Barrett, Mark Pacheco, Frank Smizek, for all of the great work which they do on these issues, and for all of you for caring about this issue so much. I apologize to you, but the bad weather made it impossible for American Airlines to get me there tonight to Belmont High School. But through the brilliance of technological breakthroughs made at Massachusetts universities, I am able to Skype into you tonight and be able to talk to you about all of these incredibly important issues. So we have the all-time climate dream team put together for this evening. Gina McCarthy, Todd Stern, John Holdren. This was the team that was used in order to put in place the dramatic reductions in greenhouse gases. That was the commitment that we made to the world pursuant to the Paris Climate Accord. And so it's my great honor to be here with them and with all of you, my colleagues up in Massachusetts. This is a trying time. The Trump administration has put together their dream team, Scott Pruitt at the EPA, Perry at the Department of Energy, Zinke at the Department of Interior. It goes on and on and on. It's almost like the perfect opposite of what we were doing from Massachusetts in the White House for 8 years, trying to give leadership to the rest of the world. And so we're gathered here in order to learn about where we are and what we can do to ensure that we maintain our leadership. So I'm proud to have been the author of the 2007 Fuel Economy Standard Law, which then, with Gina McCarthy's leadership and Barack Obama, have lifted the standards to 54.5 miles per gallon by the year 2025. That's a huge greenhouse gas reduction. It's a huge backing out of imported oil from OPEC. And now the Trump administration is saying that they want to roll it back. I am proud to have been the author of the Appliance Efficiency Law, which is the constitution for appliances. We've seen an almost doubling of the efficiency of appliances in America that has backed out the need for 100 coal-burning plants ever having to be built. And I could go on and on, but I will tell you this, that this is, for me, a time for Massachusetts to be that special state. We're not just the Bay State, we are the brain state. We believe in science. Science is not a dirty word. Science is something that we revere. Every one of us and our families were taken over to the Museum of Science when we're young so that we can begin to understand that regardless of religion, science is something that we should respect and encourage. So at the height of the Trump era, we have to stand up. We have to fight. And that is why I have asked this incredible trio of leaders to come to Belmont, to come here to explain where we are, what we have to do, and to ensure that they know that there are people here in the state of Massachusetts who want to partner with them. So let me just begin by asking the great former head of the Environmental Protection Agency of America, Gina McCarthy, to begin our program. Welcome.
Senator, I wish you were here, but I'm not so sad because now I can kiss up to you and you can't stop me. Because he is a force to be reckoned with. As a human being who spent 8 years in Washington, half of my time was going either to the House or the Senate to testify and being asked ridiculous questions, hoping that there was a Democrat who could ask me something serious that I could answer. He was the man in both sides. And I thank him for that always. He is a great leader. We should be very thankful. And first of all, I'm going to say it is great to be home. Thank you for letting me be here. Look, I'm going to try to keep my remarks to a minimum because I know we're going to have some back and forth, but I have to tell you that things I think that all of us are a bit worried about today, and it seems to be getting more worrisome every time we turn on the news. So my strategy is I don't watch the news anymore. I just isolate yourself. That's not exactly true. My strategy is actually to maintain my hope, to minimize my anger, because you have to understand that people don't like to hang around with grumpy people. If you want people to get action-oriented, if you want them to move forward with you, if you want them to take action, which is what we want, then you have to be hopeful. You have to show people that we do not give up, and America is still in, and it's all about what happens at the city and state level. Washington has never had its own serious idea that it thought up on its own. Everything good starts at the grassroots level, so it's all about your family, your kids, it's all about Belmont, it's all about Massachusetts, it's all about all the states and the cities, and now businesses are stepping up and understanding that climate change is the biggest challenge we have, not just to our planet as a whole, folks, but it's a challenge to us, our families, our kids, and their future. Get real. Let's stop getting down-washing what's going on in Washington, D.C., and let's start acting again. That's what we need to do. I'm hanging around with students now, because students at Harvard, they're so smart, but what I like best about them is they're so tech-savvy. They can find anything out anywhere, and that's good, because I want to know which businesses are actually doing the right thing. I want to make sure that we push those who aren't into doing it. We don't have to wait for government to act. We've always, in Massachusetts, gone out in front and corrected our own problems. We've met our own challenges. We don't deny the science. We embrace it. because we understand that we face our challenges together. We are the United States of America, and we're not deferring that title to any other country. So let's start picking up ourselves by the bootstraps. Let's stop watching MSNBC and screaming and yelling at one another, which is what my husband does every morning. So I'm going to give you the same advice I give to him in the most loving and kind way. Shut up. Have a cup of coffee. Hang around with young people. Get acting. Realize that there's a real world out there where good things are happening. So I'm sure you're reading about roll back this, roll back that, roll back this. Well, the trick about rollbacks is they've got to roll back rules that were done right, that followed the science, that followed the law, that sought the public everywhere we could to make sure we took everybody's interests in mind, and we did them right. Good luck to him and his little team trying to roll those back. They're not following the science. They haven't read the law. They're not doing public process. So get that out of your head. We have something called the courts, and we're going to make sure to hold the courts accountable, and those courts have to hold this administration accountable when they do shoddy work to take back big progress that we have made on our core values that brought us together, which happens to be clean air, clean water, safe and healthy places to live, and a planet we can live in. That's what we have to keep demanding. And if you think they're going to turn that all around by sitting in their little cubicles in soundproof booths, not happening, baby, not happening. So listen, focus, focus, focus. And listen, my last message to you is this. I am at Harvard because they do the best science imaginable to protect public health. And if you think that climate change is just about people getting damaged near the seacoast, you're wrong. It is a fundamental challenge to each and every family, and it's a challenge to our kids' future. And I know after working in government for 35 years what motivates people. It's their own kids, their health. So I'm at Harvard to bring that science to life, to fight against the attacks that we're seeing on climate, to make sure that we're paying attention to real information, real science, and instead of having the scientists talk to each other, we're going to talk about what the scientists know to real human beings in language they can understand. So here's my message on climate change. 3 things. Repeat them after me. Climate change is real.
Climate change is real.
Climate change is caused by man-made emissions. That's why women need to rule the world. Repeat after me. All right, everybody. So listen, I am at the Harvard Sea Change because we want to bring that science to life. I want people to understand that climate is personal. It means they can do something about it. We can do what we've always done in the United States. We can pull up our big girl pants, our big boy pants, our gender neutral pants, and we can fight it. Let's do it. Thanks very much. All right, I'm leaving now. I just dropped the mic.
So are you getting...
Gina is absolutely fantastic, but we have other guests who are also fantastic. When I was a boy,
Not like that.
when I was a boy, President Kennedy named Jerome Wiesner, the president of MIT, as his science advisor. We knew that in Massachusetts. We knew President Kennedy respected science. Donald Trump has yet to nominate a science advisor, to pick a science advisor. And when he does, we can be pretty sure his science advisor will be in a witness protection program. And he does not have to answer to the American people. Barack Obama named a brilliant successor to Jerome Wiesner. And that man was just the person to go to ensure that the science of climate change, but the science of every other issue was sound. And we have this great man with us tonight, the former science advisor to President Barack Obama, John Holdren.
All right, John.
Well, thank you very much, Ed, and thank you, Gina, for producing an act that's impossible to follow. It is a great pleasure and privilege for me to be here tonight, and I thank all of you for coming, and those who I hope by now are in the overflow room, because when last I looked, I couldn't even see the end of the line outside. I really love Gina's upbeat message. I will try to close on an upbeat note, but before then I'm going to have to share a little bit of bad news, which is what the latest science has been telling us about the pace and magnitude of climate change and what that in turn implies about what we need to do about it. Essentially, all of the new news from climate change science is bad news. Virtually everything new that we have learned since the last report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 2013 and 2014 has increased our understanding of the pace at which things are swirling down the drain in the climate change domain. 17 of the 18 warmest years in the 140 years of good thermometer records, 17 of the 18 warmest have occurred in the 17 years from 2001 through 2017. The only one in the top 18 that wasn't in that period was 1998. Just missed it, a powerful El Nino year. But it's not so much the average temperature of the Earth that is causing the problems. It is the reflection of a modest increase in the average temperature of the Earth, about 1 degree Celsius, 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, the reflection of that rather modest increase in extremes of climate and weather. When the average temperature goes up a little bit, the occurrence of extreme events goes up a lot. We have seen an enormous increase in the frequency, the intensity, and the duration of heat waves around the world. Heat wave occurred in southern France, Spain, and Italy in 2003. At the time, about a 1 in 500 year event killed 70,000 people. One heat wave, 70,000 people. The 2010 heat wave in Russia killed 50,000 people. And more than that, in the warmer countries in the world, in the hottest months of the year, it is no longer possible to work outside, to do construction, to do agriculture, to do infrastructure, without risking heat stress, heat stroke, and death. And that will continue to become a more severe problem year by year, decade by decade, unless and until we are finally able to stabilize the climate. Wildfires have increased in frequency, in extent, in temperature. The bigger wildfires are now burning hotter than ever before, making them a bigger threat to property, a bigger threat to life, a bigger threat to the firefighters. Torrential downpours, one of the most elementary consequences of a warmer world. The atmosphere being warm can hold more water. If it holds more water, more can come down at one time, and it does. We're experiencing almost all around the world increases in torrential downpours and the floods that follow. Texas, Houston, Texas, experienced 3 500-year floods in 3 years. Obviously, those are not 500-year floods anymore. The loss of forest cover. The year 2017 was the second largest loss of forest cover in the recorded history of our ability to monitor that. Unless we can turn that around and not only stop deforestation and the loss of forest cover, but reverse it with net forest growth, we have very little chance as a world of meeting the commitments that we all made in Paris. If you look at the effects on health, Gina McCarthy referred to them briefly. I mentioned already heat stress and heat stroke. In addition, the geographic range of tropical diseases, pathogens, and vectors has been spreading toward the higher latitudes. We have longer and more severe allergy seasons. We have more tick-based disease. In many, many different respects, we are seeing the direct impacts on public health of climate change, and we're seeing them already. Gina also mentioned climate change is not just a problem for our children and our grandchildren, it is a problem right now. This is probably one of the least understood aspects of the climate change issue, even among political leaders and members of the public who understand that the climate is changing and humans are causing it. The least understood aspect is perhaps that we are already at 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures, suffering severe consequences of a wide variety of kinds. You look at sea level rise. 5 years ago, we didn't know whether Antarctica was actually losing mass or not. Now we know that Antarctica is losing mass 4 times as fast from 2012 to 2017 as it was from 1992 to 1997, 4 times as fast, 220 billion tons of ice per year from Antarctica ending up in the ocean, about 300 billion tons a year from Greenland ending up in the ocean. Over the last 5 years, we have drastically increased our understanding of what is happening, the mechanisms, the magnitude, and we now know it's hardly any surprise that the rate of sea level rise itself is accelerating. The rate of sea level rise from 2000 to 2010 was twice the rate of sea level rise during the 20th century. The period from 2010 to 2017 doubled it again. Sea level rise is not constant, it is accelerating. It's accelerating both because of the ice being lost from glaciers, from the Greenland ice sheet, from the Antarctic ice sheet, but also because the ocean is warming, and when it warms, it expands. And finally, it's increasing because we're pumping out groundwater much faster than it's being replenished, and that too is adding to sea level. We pump out the groundwater, we irrigate our fields with it, it runs off down the rivers and into the ocean. What does all this mean for what we need to do? I often say that faced with the climate change challenge, society has 3 choices. Mitigation, the steps we take to reduce the pace and the ultimate magnitude of the changes in climate that occur. Adaptation, the steps we take to reduce the damages that occur from changes in climate that we can no longer avoid. And the third option is suffering. And if we want to minimize the human suffering that comes from climate change, we have to maximize mitigation, we have to maximize adaptation. They are not alternates, they are complements. We need them both in abundance. And I would point out that although the dynamics of climate change are global, the actions we need to take, and this again reinforces a point that Gina made, the actions we need to take are all local. Adaptation is local, reduction in emissions is local. We need that grassroots engagement. We need folks to become active. We need folks, by the way, to get the vote out in 2018, to elect a Congress that will take this problem as seriously as it deserves to be taken, which is very seriously indeed. Thank you very much.
Okay, here we go. So, John, thank you so much. You know, as John is saying, you know, the impacts are local. We feel it here in Massachusetts. That's why Massachusetts brought the lawsuit, Massachusetts versus EPA, that was decided in 2007. We brought the case saying that there was a big impact on our coastline from greenhouse gases. The Supreme Court told the EPA they had to make a decision if greenhouse gases were endangering our coastline, And if they decided that it was, they then had to do something about it. That's what Gina McCarthy began to do when she took over at the EPA. So we thank you, John. And what President Obama then decided was that after 8 years of inaction by George W. Bush, that he wanted to lead the effort to have a global agreement led by the United States on the reduction of greenhouse gases across the entire planet. And he needed one person who would be the chief negotiator for the United States of America, so that he could send the signal that we wanted to be the leader and not the laggard on climate change, on science. We have the man he selected with us tonight. Please give a warm Belmont welcome to the great Todd Stern.
Well, so I have figured out one thing tonight so far, which is that I'm voting for Gina. I don't know what she's running for yet, but we got to figure out something because she is off the charts. Look, I'm very pleased to be here. Senator Markey is such a great leader, has been for so long. I met him a long time ago. I think back when I first started on this issue in the Clinton White House. And he has really been one of our great leaders on this issue, as well as on so many other things. It's an honor for me to share the stage with Gina and John Holdren. John's the one who started teaching me about climate change back in 1997, and Gina is a great friend, and as you can see, in case you didn't know already, a fearless leader when she was at EPA. In my short opening comments tonight, I'm going to touch on a couple of things. First, why the Paris Agreement was so important. What is important on the follow-on agenda, if you can believe it, these negotiations are still going on right now. And maybe just a word or two about the larger challenge of which the Paris Agreement is a part. So let me start with why Paris is important, and let me set it in context. First of all, in dealing with climate change, you have to have an international agreement. And the reason for that, I mean, that's not self-evident. You don't have to have an international agreement to deal with local water pollution or local air pollution. Many environmental problems, probably most, can be dealt with locally. Climate change is a quintessentially international, global issue. The pollution, the climate pollution, CO2 that you emit in Indianapolis has the same effect as the CO2 in India. It spreads in the atmosphere, and so you've got to have a global solution. And you need to have other countries, all countries have to be confident that their counterparts and their competitors are acting if they're going to be asked to act. The original framework agreement on climate goes all the way back to 1992, and pretty much within 2 or 3 years after that agreement, it was understood that there needed to be something more, an operational agreement where countries would take real action and make real commitments to reduce emissions. That hadn't happened yet. And for a long time, efforts went on to try to achieve that, and the efforts, in one way or another, didn't work. The thing that came closest was the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, but for reasons I won't bore you with right now, that didn't work either. From the start, climate negotiations back to 1992 were acrimonious and divisive, the kind of fault line that ran through these negotiations, and it still runs through, although we've made some progress. Is the sharp division between developed and developing countries made the negotiations very difficult. And let me tell you, climate negotiations are inherently tough. I mean, let's just stop and think about it for a minute. Climate change is not, I mean, there are other agreements, not easy to negotiate. Most successful environmental agreement ever was probably the Montreal Protocol to repair the hole in the ozone layer. That was a fairly small number of countries who produced the relevant chemicals. And it was just one relevant, or a handful of relevant chemicals that had to be controlled. Climate change is about burning fossil fuels and also the release of greenhouse gases in land use, but especially through the burning of fossil fuels, which means everything to do with your economy is affected by climate change. So countries, naturally get worried when they're asked to take action that they think is going to cost money and that could damage their own economy. In addition, you have over 190 countries who are involved, and then the kicker is that the climate change negotiations operate on essentially a consensus rule. So if you have one country, or maybe not just one, but 2 or 3 countries who say no, you've got no deal. So this is a dive with a very high degree of difficulty, so to speak. Paris was a breakthrough agreement. Paris was finally that operational agreement that we had been seeking for 20 years. What happened?
What happened?
We just lost the leader? Is that what happened? He's heard it all before. It's okay. I'm going to tell you anyway. First of all, universal. If you look back at Kyoto, Kyoto only applied to the developed countries. That's great, except right now, developing countries probably account for 60 to 65% of global emissions. So you got to have everybody in. Second, it's ambitious. It set ambitious goals. It set a path. No agreement had done that before. It said we've got to reduce our emissions enough to hold global temperature increase to well below 2 degrees and several other important goals. It established targets from all countries, again, not just developed. It set up repeating cycles. Every 5 years, countries have to take a look at their targets and re-up. So this is meant to be a durable and ever-increasing, increasingly ambitious target. And it also called for countries not just to do the targets right now, but to set forth, not as a target, but as a program, mid-century strategies. Where are you going, not just now, but out to 2050? All of those things super important. It included several different paradigm shifts as compared to any other climate negotiations that had happened before. First of all, the targets for countries were nationally determined. The countries had to make their own decision about what to do. With all these countries, you couldn't have a negotiation where all countries are supposed to agree on each other's targets. It smoothed out the hard edges that I talked about, that fault line. There is still differentiation. There should be differentiation. Countries have different circumstances, but it's not in that hard-edged way where we're doing nothing and you guys are supposed to do everything. And it's a kind of a legal hybrid. It's partly legally binding and partly not legally binding. So the targets themselves, not legally binding. The accountability system, including most importantly the system of so-called transparency, how countries report on their actions and are reviewed on them, those things are legally binding. Some people have criticized Paris. Some pundits, particularly ones who don't spend a lot of time on climate change, have said, well, Paris isn't important because the targets aren't legally binding. That misses the point. First of all, you could not possibly get an agreement done by asking all countries to do legally binding targets. And if you somehow you could have, the targets would have been lower, not higher, because countries would have been afraid of the consequences of not meeting their targets. Paris, in essence, made the opposite bet, that the rising force of norms and expectations among countries would drive progress on climate change much better than an attempt to do a purely legal agreement. And I think a way to look at it is to say that in essence, Paris was about finding the sweet spot between what was necessary and what was possible. It's easy to demand what seems necessary but isn't really possible. And it's also easy to do the politically expedient thing without worrying about what you actually have to get done. And again, Paris, that the sweet spot is very hard to find, and Paris did that. Now, President Trump announced his intention to withdraw from Paris on June 1st of last year. Let me just say, there was no constituency arguing for this. There was no basis for pulling the United States out. And if you look across the board of the US economy, if you look at the Fortune 500 CEOs, you had virtually no support for pulling out of Paris. Because business knew that this was an agreement that could actually work. They know that the business guys, the people who are CEOs, they live in a world of facts, because if they don't, they're going to be ex-CEOs. And they knew that this was the direction of history. It was not going to help them as business people to pull out, and yet that's the decision that Trump made. I think essentially as a matter of playing to what he saw as his base politics. As I said, I'm not going to take a lot of time on it, but there is ongoing negotiations this year. There are a number of, when you negotiate a big agreement like Paris, there's a number of follow-on steps that have to be taken. You negotiate an article on transparency, then there's more detailed guidelines that have to follow, and on in a number of other areas. Those are important. They're going on now, and they're difficult. And they're made more difficult by the fact that the United States is not there. And it makes it easier for certain countries who are up to mischief to try to pull back on some of the things they didn't like in Paris. A quick word on the larger picture. International negotiations, as I said, are necessary. They're necessary, but of course not sufficient. The action, the name of the game here is about the transformation of the global economy from high carbon to low and before too long, no carbon. So you need action at the national level, at the state and city level, and among companies. Holding global average temperature to well below 2 degrees is a daunting task. This is not at all easy, but I want to tell you that it is absolutely doable. It is doable as a matter of innovation. The innovation side of the equation on clean energy is going faster than any of the forecasters predicted. It's possible on the basis of policy. We know exactly what we need to do in terms of policy to provide the right incentives for clean energy and the disincentives for fossil fuels. And we can do it as a matter of cost, as a matter of financing. The Citibank put out a report 2-3 years ago where they analyzed a kind of 30-year analysis of 2 different scenarios. Full-out action on climate change, no action on climate change. Guess what came out to be less expensive? The full action was less expensive than the no action without counting damages. And that's because you put a lot of investment in up front, but then guess what? You don't pay for the fuel because you're getting it from the sun, you're getting it from the wind, and so forth. But here's the hard part. The hard part, the rocket science isn't rocket science. The rocket science is human beings. The rocket science is political will. That's the thing that's hard, and I think there's 3 hurdles that we're facing. One is the incumbency of the fossil fuel industry. I mean, there's enormous amounts of money plowed into a global infrastructure on fossil fuels, and when they read experts saying in order to meet our goals, only about between 1/3 and 1/5 of the fossil fuels in the world can come out of the ground, well, then they've got a big concern. So you've got the power of incumbency. That incumbency, by the way, has helped through all sorts of mechanisms to entrench a kind of denialist minority, which is particularly effective in the United States and actually particularly effective, unfortunately, in Congress. That is, I think, a diminishing problem. The more you look at polling, the more you look at polling among younger people, that is a problem that's fading, but it hasn't gone yet. And the third thing is I think there's a real tendency on the part of even the most well-meaning people, the people I worked with in the White House, who I worked with when I was teaching at Yale a couple of years ago, who I've worked with, whether it's at Brookings or other good places, to think that we're moving in the right direction, so we're okay. A kind of sense of a natural human sense that gradualism is okay. The thing is, it's not okay here. We are moving in the right direction. Again, the developments on innovation have been fantastic, but the issue here is scale and speed for the exact reasons that you heard from John Holdren. So I'm going to shut up now and take my seat, and we'll take questions from the audience.
Excellent.
So we're going to now going to begin questions from the audience for this incredible panel, and so we'd just like to ask people to line up and come to the microphones and answer and ask your question, and we have the people who do know the answers. I just wanted to follow up just a little bit on this clean energy revolution. Donald Trump successfully, from a political perspective, made a metaphor about 50,000 coal miners and how much he cared about them. In 2016, 50,000 new solar jobs were created in the United States in 1 year. We now have 250,000 solar jobs in our country. We have 100,000 wind jobs. We have 350,000 people working in wind and solar in the United States. And who are they? Well, they're electricians. They're roofers. This is the greatest blue-collar, job-creating revolution in 2 generations. This revolution is creating the jobs of the next generation. And we just have to become more aggressive in making this case that we are trying to save all of creation, but we're doing so by engaging in massive job creation, blue-collar job creation. And we are not going to retreat. We are going to continue down this path. So with that, let us go to our first question.
We'll take questions back and forth. You got it there?
Hi, I'm Roger Shamel. I used to live in this great state of Massachusetts, but I drove down from New Hampshire to be here, and I want to thank Senator Markey and all the speakers for what they're doing. It's fantastic. I'm a graduate of Harvard, so that means I'm pretty smart, right? But I just heard of some science lately where there's no correlation between intelligence and education and denial of climate change. And I've run into a lot of Harvard alumni who don't get it, I'm sorry to report. So I direct my question mostly to Gina. Yes, you.
Okay.
Public health, it seems, often starts with the public understanding. Like, it's not safe to swim there. It's not safe to drink that water. Given the fact that you're at Harvard, which is a worldwide respected institution, and the fact that many Harvard alumni don't get this, and there's a new president starting at Harvard next week, Larry Bacow, I wonder if you think it might be a good idea to just start with Harvard alumni to inform them of what you said, that climate change is real and serious, and leave out the women part, but that we should be concerned about. Well,
Totally not going to happen.
we men are concerned too. Do you think that would help?
I get your point, and I'll keep my answer very short. I think the challenge we have with climate, we have a couple of challenges. One is that you can't see it, feel it, and touch it and taste it until it hits you. And most people don't recognize when they're getting hit unless it's hitting them right over the head by a wave or a fire or something like that. In the old days, pollution, you could see it, everybody rallied around it, you know when it got better. That's a challenge for human beings. Secondly, we've been communicating it as a polar bear problem and not a kid's problem. And we've been trying to scare people into action. People are afraid to do 2 things. They either deny it or they run away from it. We have to stop it because, in my opinion, a low-carbon future is better for our kids, not just because the planet will be healthier, but they'll be healthier. And we have solutions today that we never had before, and we should stop denying them and investing in them. So let's not argue about climate change. Let's just agree that a low-carbon future is where our economy is, it is where our health is, and it's where our kids' future is. Let's run for it.
I would like to thank the panel today. Wonderful job, wonderful job. And although Senator Markey is there, and I would like to thank you personally, Senator. My name is Joe Curl. I'm the president of the Boston Gas Local 1203 United Steelworkers, and you were one of the first senators to write to National Grid and to tell them to not lock out 1,300 workers. So I personally want to thank you. I think that was it was wonderful. We need more politicians like you. Now, I will talk about climate change because that is what this is about. And I want the panel to think about this while I talk. They have mothers out front. They have a number of different organizations. They're wonderful organizations. We have signs that we're placing up, fix the leaks, and we intend to put them all over Belmont and every other city in town to bring attention to the gas leaks. But what I would like to say is that people always think about fixing the gas leaks. And it has to be done. It's our job. But our job also is to prevent the gas leaks. And a grade 3 leak that would leak for 20 years, you could have a high pressure main that gets ripped up like they have been ripped up in Lexington in the last few years by contractors that don't do their job correctly, and they leak gas for 3 hours, 5 hours, and all of that gas clearly outpasses a grade 3 leak. So one mistake in all of the time trying to fix these grade 3s. So prevention is key to climate change. Prevention is key because the company that I work for, I had to fight like hell because in 2011, they hired no inspectors, no pipeline inspectors, and it was this town, Belmont, that brought it to my attention when Pleasant Street, the contractor buried the main 18 inches.
Sir?
Yes.
I'm
To the
just-
question?
Yeah, because we do have a lot
I'm
of people
sorry.
behind you, and
Yes.
there's only so much time tonight.
The question is, how does prevention work in the field of methane, and how can we better have further prevention from corporations and make them do the right thing so that we will not have these gas leaks?
I'll take a very brief crack at that. We had in the Obama administration, as part of the Climate Action Plan, a methane strategy, which you'll be happy to know stressed prevention. It stressed doing things right the first time, including in the fracking operations. One of the things that has been discovered about methane leaks in the United States from the oil and gas industry is that a very substantial fraction of the total is coming from a relatively small number of bad actors. The good news there is that if it's a relatively small number of bad actors, you can identify them and fix it. I think a lot of the leaders in the oil and gas industry understand that if they screw this up, then fracking is going to be over. They have every incentive to get it right. And in fact, there has been a lot of partnership between the private sector and the government, at least in the last administration, on how to get our arms around that problem and solve it. The challenge we now face is we have an administration which has got its head in the sand.
My name is Leonid Sakharov. I just hard scientist in the area of material science, and I'm really curious. Do anybody of you was able to learn about temperature changes obtained from Vostok station that on the base isotope ratio was able to trace temperature for 400,000 years ago. Now, looks like from this data, we are living in borrowed time just before Ice Age, when usually temperature of Earth 10 degrees below.
Thank you, sir. Let's ask the panel about if they can talk a little bit about the back history of climate change, what happened a little bit further back.
Well, very quickly, we actually know quite a lot from paleoclimatological studies, various proxies for temperature, including the composition of bubbles trapped in ice cores. And we know that the natural influences on climate were cooling the world for about 7,000 years before the Industrial Revolution began. And in the absence of the Industrial Revolution and the huge fossil fuel emissions that followed and the deforestation that continued, the world would have been heading for another ice age in perhaps another 10,000 years. We solved that problem by dominating the natural influences with the human ones, but we overcompensated. And that is the problem we now face.
Hello, my name is Andrea Yodsampa. I'm CEO of Deploy US, which is a nonprofit focused on federal climate policy. And we work intensively with leaders right of the political center who care passionately about climate change and are committed to bipartisan solutions. This field of Republican and conservative leaders is represented by about 24 nonprofits around the country working on federal policy solutions. Some of them are actually conservative themselves. Some are just well positioned to speak to conservatives about this issue, like military leaders, business leaders, conservative faith leaders. I know some of you know these people. And as you probably are well aware, there's a lot happening underneath the surface in the Republican Party. We've passed major bipartisan policy over time when the Republican brand was both dominant and damaged historically. So the question is, do you see any path to truly solving this problem or to true, meaningful, sustained US leadership on this issue without bipartisan support? And if not, because I don't, how do we get back to a bipartisan position on this issue? Thank you.
That's a great question for the senator to ask if he could hear it, which is how do we get to a bipartisan leadership in the Senate on climate change, or is it possible that the Republicans in their majority would do anything on this issue?
Well, is he here?
So I apologize. I'm listening on 3 different devices here. So if you see me running around, it's just because of the jerry-built system we've constructed here. The problem that we have in Washington right now is ultimately the overarching issue for climate change and every other issue, which is that we need to repeal Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. We have to ensure we make this a huge issue in the campaign this year. When the Koch brothers talk about $500 million being spent on the elections this year, it's with the intention of ensuring that nothing happens on climate change. So Donald Trump right now, for all intents and purposes, is getting his science from the Koch brothers. And that science is about as bogus as a degree from Trump University. And it fundamentally doesn't even factor in that Mar-a-Lago is actually going to turn into Mara Lagoon by the year 2030 for 30% of the year. But he can protect himself. He's wealthy. And so unfortunately, that is the Democrats, we have a hard time finding Republicans who we know agree with us, who we know believe in science, stepping forward. Now, a big part of it is, obviously, Mitch McConnell is from Kentucky, from coal country. He is the leader of the Republican Party. And Donald Trump, at the same time, is committed to honoring his promise to those coal miners, even if it's at the expense of hundreds of thousands of jobs in renewables, in clean energy in general, in all-electric vehicles. So this web of denial that was funded by the fossil fuel companies, that was modeled on the web of denial which the tobacco industry used for 40 to 50 years to try to create this barrier between actual smoking and the reality that it could cause cancer. Well, this is the battle that we're fighting right now. This is the war we're in, and it is well funded on the other side. What we have on our side is this younger generation, the green generation is rising up. This issue is now polling well almost unanimously amongst those who are millennials. It is polling well amongst Republicans increasingly. So we think as each day, week goes by, we're going to see more and more political activity on our side. And many of these fossil fuel companies are running the very real risk that they're going to be in violation of the Securities Exchange Commission full disclosure, because there is going to be a lot of the oil and coal and gas which they have that is never coming out of the ground. And they know it. They know that the all-electric vehicle revolution, they know the drop in the price of wind and solar and other renewables is endangering their fossil fuels that they already have, even as they want to bid to drill in the Arctic refuge. And they're trying to speed that up so that they can gain access to those leases on a bargain basement price. So I wish that it was possible for us to craft bipartisan legislation right now. I know it's going to happen, though. I know that we're going to be able to move forward. It's just a matter of time, but it's also critical for us to prove in Massachusetts why it's so great that our state legislators continue to be the leaders, why the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative from New England through New York down through Maryland and Virginia is going to join, prove that you can reduce greenhouse gases even as you dramatically increase the GDP of your economy. So the Koch brothers right now are calling the tune in this White House. That's why this election in November is so important. We have to send a message to Washington, and other climate change activists across the country have to send a message to Washington that they're going to vote for people who are going to do something about this crisis. And I think we're about to reach that point in the next 4.5 months. We just have to keep our energy level high. So thank you all so much for everything.
We'll take the next question, but please, in light of the lines, the question.
That's all I got. Hi, my name is Katie. I'm here with Sunrise Boston, which is a movement of young people working to stop climate change and create millions of jobs in the process. I have a question specifically for Senator Markey. I want to thank you for all your work on climate change and clean energy legislation so far. But I want to ask you to take the next step and prove your commitment to the health and well-being of our planet and all people by pledging to not accept money from the fossil fuel industry.
The one promise that I can make you is that the likelihood of the coal industry or ExxonMobil even considering sending a contribution to me is -0. So from my perspective, I am going to continue to fight for this clean energy revolution. We already have 100,000 jobs in Massachusetts in the clean energy sector. It is now one of the top 10 employers in the Massachusetts economy. It's up from almost nothing in the year 2000. So my goal is every day to move us towards 100% renewable electricity in the year 2050, regardless of what the fossil fuel industry may think that is going to happen in Washington. And I've introduced that resolution, and I have 10 senators co-sponsoring my bill in Washington right now. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bob Massey. I'm running for governor of Massachusetts. I have had the privilege of working with a number of you and founding the Investor Network on Climate Risk. My question is, if I have the privilege of being elected governor and we want to move boldly and aggressively toward the targets that you are recommending for this state, could you each suggest 1 or 2 stretch views, stretch actions, bold actions that I could take as governor in the first couple of months of my administration?
Okay, so I guess that was directed at the panel, and I think it's probably a fair question.
Well, I would suggest one of the first things I would do is I would look at the bill that passed through the Senate that actually, you have the framers, Senator Pacheco and Senator Bartlett here. I would think about putting some details on that bill, and I'd think about getting it passed.
Thank you.
I think you should join California in embracing fuel economy standards that are aggressive and that basically force the manufacturers to meet them, because if enough states with enough population impose those kinds of standards, the retreat of the federal government won't make any difference.
There is a price on carbon through the RGGI program for the power sector. The new legislation that Gina is talking about would put a price on carbon in the transportation sector. I think that those things are hugely important. I think to be stretched and to go as far as you can, the issue will be A, to get the price on carbon in the first place, and B, to get that price to be as high as possible so that it will actually drive change.
Thank you. Let me come back to Gina momentarily for a supplementary answer on that.
Sorry, Senator, just for a second. I want to recognize Kevin Knobloch. That is you, right? Because I have that light hanging. Kevin Knobloch is here. He was the chief of staff to Ernie Moniz at the Department of Energy. He ran UCS. He's an Arlington native. Forgive him for that, but he's awesome.
Senator, did you want to respond to that, or should we go to the next question? We'll go to the next question.
Okay. I want to ask the panel and how we as a group can do a better job of mobilizing around influencing our state and local governments. And the reason I ask this is because those are the institutions that impact building codes. And buildings consume more energy on this planet than anything else, much more than vehicles. And building codes are currently really energy efficient. For example, a building like this, any non-residential building, has to replace all of the air inside the building every 1 to 2 hours with outside air. It consumes like 20 to 25% of the energy in the entire building. And
so you've got a good question on the table.
So the question is, how do we mobilize these state and local governments to go look at better solutions? I know Harvard's implementing some air scrubbing technologies, but we need the building codes to change.
Got it.
Question asked. Senator, do you want to speak to that, or go to the panel?
This is a critical issue. Back in 2009, Henry Waxman from California and I were able to pass a global warming bill that reduced greenhouse gases by 80% nationwide by the year 2050. We passed it through the House of Representatives. It ultimately fell short, notwithstanding the great work of John Kerry, of the 60 votes they needed in the Senate. It came very close. In that bill, to your point, we had a requirement that within 7 years, all new buildings being constructed in the United States had to be 50% more efficient than old buildings. It only makes sense. You save money, you reduce greenhouse gases, you're moving to modern technologies, and it is just common sense. So here in Massachusetts, again, we have great leaders, Mike Barrett, Senator Pacheco, Senator Brownsberger, Representatives Rogers and Smizek. They're incredible leaders. And I do think it's important for us to be the leaders. And the climate bill that they're moving through the Massachusetts State Legislature so that we can be the leaders is something that ultimately can become a model for the rest of our country. And I do believe that ultimately it's going to become an industry-led movement. That is, that hotels and construction industries are going to say, we want to make more energy efficient buildings. We want to move in that direction. It's consistent with a good business model, and the public wants us to do it. So I just think we're going to do it. Again, it's hard in a Trump era, and much like the renewable electricity standards that are in place in 30 states, the fuel economy standards that are still being protected by California and Massachusetts and New York nationally. We just need, at the state levels, as you're saying, to implement policies that can show that we can do this. We led on gay marriage, we led on the Affordable Care Act, we can lead on this issue as well.
Thank you so much. So we're going to take, I'm terribly sorry to say this, one more question, and at the end I'll explain how additional questions can get answers, but Belmont High School is limiting our time here. So I got one question at the front of this line and one question at the front of this line, and then we'll have closing statements.
Hi, my name's Erin Macri, and I'm from Watertown, Massachusetts. A combination of under-regulated high polluter companies and industries and current administration's efforts to censor language and phrases such as climate change and sea level rise in federal documents are contributing to a nation that is ill-prepared to deal with natural disasters. More often than not, our natural resources transcend state boundaries. In an ideal situation, an overarching entity would effectively and efficiently monitor our national environmental resources. But I believe the job for now will be left up to states and local governments. What legislative or policy options are there for states to unite to protect human health and the environment?
Legislative options for states to unite in feeling that the federal government won't give us the leadership we need.
Well, let me just give you at least a short answer, which is in the wake of the president's announcement that he intended to withdraw from Paris, which, by the way, doesn't become final until November 4th, 2020, which is one day after the next election. But in the wake of that announcement last June 1st, within days, an organization called We Are Still In, a movement called We Are Still In, started. There are some 2,700 entities that are part of that now, states, cities, companies, civil society. But one of the actions that has followed from that is the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is now 17 states, including Puerto Rico, including Massachusetts, most recently New Jersey, of states that have their own targets, that are taking strong actions, that are committed to the Paris goals, and that are committed to being strong on climate. 17 is not 50, but it's a very good start. It's about 50%. The We Are Still In group is about 50% of U.S. population, about 40% of U.S. GDP, 35% of U.S. emissions. Though it's important that they act, and it's important also that they send the message of acting, both to people in this country and to the international community, so that they can see that things may have gone dark in Washington, but they're alive across the country.
Take a question from this line, and we will have a mechanism for other questions to get answered, and I'll talk about that in a moment.
If we're not going to have any bipartisan action and we have to wait for a 2021 Democratic trifecta to have any national climate action, what are your post-mortems for why we failed in 2009? Do you think we were not ambitious enough in our initial ask and were forced to negotiate down? Do you think we didn't explain the military and intelligence consequences to senators who didn't respect science? What do you think were the final obstacles that stopped us in 2009, and how can we overcome them in 2021?
Let's give the senator a minute to see if he heard that question. I guess he's listening off camera there. Because that's definitely a question for him. Let's pause for a minute. This is a tough thing to make work here.
Yeah. The answer to the question of what happened in 2009, we were able to pass it through the House of Representatives. It went over to the Senate. Peabody Coal Company, Alpha Coal Company, Arch Coal Company, all went to the Republican leadership. The Koch brothers went to the Republican leadership. They said to kill the Waxman-Markey bill, 80% reduction in greenhouse gases by the year 2050. Now, here's what's happened since 2009. Peabody Coal has gone bankrupt. Arch Coal has gone bankrupt. Alpha Coal has gone bankrupt because of a revolution that industries, utilities realize that they have to move to a lower carbon footprint. And so we lost because of money in politics. We lost because of the disproportionate influence of the fossil fuel industry. Not even a 20th century industry, a 19th century industry. And so with every new windmill that is deployed, with every new solar panel, with every new electric vehicle, we are getting closer and closer to creating the political capital, people who work in these industries, people who vote on these issues, that will get us the votes to pass climate control, to pass a carbon fee, to pass the kinds of changes that you are looking for. So I'm greatly, obviously, disappointed at what happened in 2009. I was the author of the bill, but ultimately, you know, liberals are usually right, but too soon. We just can't get discouraged. We have to just say we're in this fight for the long term. We were as abolitionists, we were as suffragettes, we were as the gay marriage movement, we were as the Affordable Care Act movement, and we have to be with this as well. We are going to win. We are going to overcome this fossil fuel industry. They are heading downhill politically and economically. They're hiding it from their shareholders. But if we stay in this game, we will put together the political clout which we need. Hopefully, it will not have to happen after catastrophic fires and hurricanes and disasters that claim human life are so overwhelming that finally they're driven to the table. Hopefully it will be common sense, but we know that if we don't act, we are going to see and suffer the worst, most catastrophic consequences of climate change. And then we will act. The test of us as a society is if we can act before that happens.
Senator, thank you so much. That sounds like a great place to stop. I mean, do you want to say anything more?
I would like to thank all the panelists and ask each one of them to give their 2-minute charge to the audience, what you want them to remember about tonight.
Up to 2 minutes. Gina McCarthy.
Okay. First of all, I want you to remember to vote. And if you have children, tell them if when they get to be 18, they better register. I'm never talking to them again, not that I have before. I want you to remember that you have great leadership in Massachusetts. I think we take that for granted. The time that I spent in Washington told me that pretty clearly. You have Senator Markey, who's a tremendous leader. You have Senator Pacheco, you have Senator Barrett. You have a wealth of people that represent the public and understand what public service means. So we are very lucky. But my final word is that you have to remember to look at the real world. We have signs of democracy today that we haven't seen since the 70s. When is the last time you went to a march? Pull out those bell bottoms, pull out those tie-dyed shirts. Go to the women's marches, go to the science marches, look at those students from Parkland, and then you tell me that democracy's dying. I don't believe it. Grab it, run with it, get excited. Clean energy's gonna happen. It's the economy, stupid. Thank you very much.
I think we need to propagate Gina McCarthy, not just all over the state, but all over the nation.
Boy, that would terrify my husband.
I think I think you need to educate your neighbors, your friends, your legislators, your colleagues that we need to move faster. We need to move faster on emissions reductions. We need to move faster on investing in climate change preparedness, resilience, and adaptation. We can do it in ways, as have already been pointed out, that are win-win, that bring many side benefits, and that cost far less than the rewards they bring in avoided damages. Let's get on with it.
I would just go back to what I said at the end of my remarks, which is that we know what we need to do. The innovation is there, the policy is there, the financing is there. It's the political will that matters. The only way we're going to ultimately get political will is when members of Congress and politicians know that they will be punished if they don't act on this. Right now, Right now, that's not the case. Right now, you can give this the back of your hand, and there's not enough downside. There's downside with angry base, Trump base. If you do take action, there's got to be real downsides if you ignore this issue, and that's got to be driven through the public. That's it. Thank you.
So back to Senator Markey for some closing words. Give him a minute.
He's so cute.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm married to a public health doctor, and here's what I know. The planet is running a fever. There are no emergency rooms for planet, so we have to engage in preventative action in order to protect this planet. That is what we do in Massachusetts. That's the leadership that we provide. When Pope Francis addressed the Congress in his sermon on the Hill with John Boehner over his shoulder, he said three things. One, and it's dangerous to name a Jesuit who taught high school chemistry as Pope. And he said three things. Number one, the planet is dangerously warming. Number two, that it was largely because of human activity. And three, that Congress and the American people had a moral responsibility to protect those most vulnerable on our planet. That is still our charge. And we thank all of you for everything you do on this issue. And if I could, before we end, could we just give one more round of applause for this historically great panel, Will Brownsberger on incredible climate change.
Signing off, the senators signing off in Washington. Now, there were a number of questions that we didn't get to answer, and two routes to get those questions answered. One, I'm going to ask, it's a little tough now that everybody's standing up, but Senator Markey's staff, stand and wave your hands. Where are you? I've got one here in front. Actually, we got one on the side. I've got another in front. So there's three in front, one on the side. And by the way, you also have the two leading senators in Massachusetts and this leading state rep in Massachusetts on these issues, Senator Pacheco, Senator Barrett, and Representative Smisek down here, so that they're very, very happy to take your questions, and I'll stick around too. Thank you, everybody, for a great event.